Good morning and welcome to PSA, People, Stories, and Accounting. I'm here again with none other than Philip Stein himself. Thank you, Philip, for joining
Here
us. And
here
I'm
I am.
and I'm Jakob Jacob. So let's Philip, you want to start us off
Yeah,
with
we have something new, and I'll start as you say. This is one of the things we like to the theme is stories, and I was thinking of my maternal grandfather, who I was very close to. I grew up with him. I worked for him. The man survived the First World War. He survived the rise of communism. He survived the Great Depression. He survived the World War II. He survived so many things. But when Social Security Administration decided to no longer mail checks, it was
yeah.
like he couldn't handle it, okay? Because his of going to the mailbox and getting that check and taking to the bank was sort of the pillar of his existence. And when the Social Security Administration announced no more, we're not mailing checks anymore, he could not handle it. So that brings us to today because the IRS seems to have have going down a similar path.
Yeah. And it's funny because the IRS in a lot of ways it is super archaic in terms of its software. It is super focused on security first. And on the flip side, as you know, I always love AI. I have a Mac Mini sitting on my desk now for me to play with the Apple AI products that they have. And there's just, on that front, everything is going like less security, more convenience. There's crazy things happening in the world nowadays. And so we have like this balance. And now we're trying to kind of bridge it, I think, with the IRS further.
So what's included in this new IRS release that brought us together again?
Yeah, so what's really going on right now is that in the beginning of 2025, really, President Trump signed a new executive order. And that executive order basically said the IRS and other federal agencies have to finally start to modernize, and therefore no more checks going in the mail. Nothing is going to be sent out that way in the future. It's going to be all digitalized, and everything has to be through debits through the banks or anything else like that. And he set them a deadline of September 30th, 2025, which, as you know, came and went. It was a big day here in Israel because there was another extension in terms of IRS filings to the 2026 year. But that did come by. They released something on September 30th, 2025, but it was basically just be aware we're going to change things in the future. You don't have to change anything right now. And there was one of those AI hiccups where news agencies started saying already, you can't do things with checks anymore and everything else. And nothing actually, that was
Uh-huh.
incorrect. The IRS just said in
Okay,
the future will
that's
be
good
something.
news. Okay.
Yeah. And now they finally came out with something when they reopened up the tax softwares and the systems for the 2026 year for tax filings. They finally came out and said, okay, refunds are going to stop being by check by default. And so that's the main thing in it, and it's going to affect a lot of people. Now, it isn't going to be a total wipeout of refund checks, but they are definitely modernizing the system and telling people, "Hey, we'd rather get you to use direct deposit and stop relying on refund checks."
So my first reaction would be, okay, most people I think we know have bank accounts. Okay. I remember years ago I had a client who came in and, I did my usual intake and I said, cell phone number, don't have a cell phone. Email, don't have email. Fax, don't have
Yeah.
fax. And I was like, I don't think you and I can work together. Okay. But everyone more or less has a bank account, and particularly in Israel, most of our clientele. So can they just give their Israeli bank account number and that'll be that?
Yeah, no. I remember when I made Aliyah years ago, it was like one of the first stages of what you do when you get here is you open up a
Right.
bank account and the like.
Right.
But this is specifically, it has to be a US bank account. And the
Wow.
IRS has not yet figured out the ability of how to send money overseas to foreign accounts.
Okay. That's a big one.
Again,
Okay.
I think it has to do with the security limitations, meaning if you think about it, it makes sense. If all of a sudden you're sending money overseas to foreign accounts, then scammers and phishing schemes and everything else just opens the door, and there's no way that they will be ever able to recover that money or find the people who are running these scams and the like. And so it's really a security system from their standpoint where they haven't done it. Oddly enough, going back to your original story, Social Security has had the ability to send money overseas to foreign accounts for
Right.
a
That's
long,
correct.
long while now.
Yes. That's correct. Yes. We have
So
clients
it's
who But that's an option when I'm fortunately reached the age where I do get Social Security today, and that is one of the questions they say. Do you want it to go into a US bank account, or do you want it to go, not every bank, I think, can accept it in Israel, but maybe it's changed today. But yeah, Social Security can do it.
Yeah. And it's one of the biggest systems that the IRS and Social Security really do share a lot of their systems together, right? So if your Social Security card still has your old maiden name, that's the name that the IRS is going with. So it's weird that they don't jump on that same protocol to be able
Mhm,
to send
mhm.
international funds, but again, I think it's more of a security risk for them than anything else. And so that's where they're looking at right now.
So I know, I mean, we're living in times of, you and I have a colleague who told us about, he got a call from his wife asking for, she said, "I don't have my credit card. Can you give me?" And it turned out it was fake. It was AI. It wasn't his wife. Only based on. So there's a lot of, in all these wonderful new applications, we're headed to a world where probably our information and our money and our assets are perhaps less secure. I even saw a news item recently about people having their houses registered by other people under their, they do no, it's a bit, scary out there. So I guess the IRS, or Trump in particular, is responding to this, but I think that's just the flip side of all of this,
Yeah.
the
Now,
digital age.
what
Okay,
is
so
very interesting at this point is as big as the security risks and everything that they do try to avoid, the IRS doesn't really track which accounts, if it is a US account, who owns that account in any ways, right? So
correct.
we've had some funny cases where Philip, you might be somewhat familiar with this, that if
Yes.
someone puts your bank account as the one that they want to use to pay taxes with, and they file their tax return that way, that money just shoop can
Yeah.
shoot out of
Yeah.
your bank account,
Yeah, and
even though it's
I've had that experience at banks. When I confronted the bank, I said, it wasn't me personally, but I heard about it. And I said, "Why did you do this?" And they said, "You know what? If we get a debit request from the Internal Revenue Service, we think that's legit. Okay, it's not some Nigerian prince. Okay,
right,
so we're not going to necessarily call you, but your point is well taken, that you just give your account and forwarding information, and the
yeah.
boxes are there. No one is going to check that. So in this release, which sounds kind of worrisome for a lot of people, particularly people who no longer have bank accounts in the US. So what's not included?
Yeah. So what's not included is payments at the moment. The IRS, the very first thing, as you know, you can mail in a tax return to them with a paper check. They might take months and months to process the tax return, but the very first thing that they do is grab that check, cash it almost immediately. So that
Right.
that will they'll still accept at the moment, but they are looking to make changes there. So they do say, that will be something in the future, but at the moment, if the only way that you can pay is by check, they will still accept the check payments. That is not
But
included in
so
this.
your point, it was, you mentioned it, but I want to emphasize, you said the default will be electronic or digital, but that doesn't mean the only way, right?
Right, right. Um, yeah, for payments still, you can use checks, you can pay by credit card still online. If you do have a US bank account, that is the best way to pay. And the IRS keeps on claiming wire transfers, right? You can still do international wire transfers. Their forms for those international wire transfers are crazy, and it needs you to take the actual documents and everything and walk into the bank with you, filled
You,
out, and have
oh,
all of the
crazy.
connections work. Can't do it with every bank. Most international banks cannot do it. And I don't know why they keep on harping on this wire transfer thing when it doesn't work very well for people internationally. But, hopefully they will build out a better system.
So,
So
you and I
we'll
have
see.
seen over the years, or I've certainly seen it. People move, they live here. At some point, either they don't see a need for their US bank account, or the bank throws them out, or brokers say, we
Yeah.
don't we don't want you because you live outside of the US. So there's a lot of people out there who are saying, okay, I don't have a US bank account, and for me to reopen one living here is sort of mission impossible. What other are there any, there must be some alternatives out there
Yeah, for
if this
sure.
goes through.
So yeah, absolutely there are. And we've actually I've spoken to a number of phenomenal people who have all of these different solutions, and we can pull them all in. And I'm happy to kind of give people a little bit of an idea of what there is, what the possibilities are. But if you have a US bank account, I would hold on to that thing with dear life because it will become super, super important. And you're right. There are people who are living abroad and their US bank accounts will say, sorry, even if you're a US citizen, if you're not a US resident, we won't let you open up this bank account. And then there's a problem for those people who are not US citizens, but have investments in the US. Let's say there's a bunch of people, right? Israelis, international people living abroad who are investing in US real estate. It's a big market. So all of a sudden they owe tax. How are they supposed to file and pay that tax or get a refund, right? Especially with withholding requirements. Think about all of the non US people that have FDAP 30% withholding automatically, and then they have to file a return to get that money back and they
Wow.
can't get a paper check, it's gonna be a disaster because they don't necessarily have US bank accounts. So, we do have some ways around that. There are some solutions, some that work for US citizens abroad, some that work for anybody abroad, and we can go through that. The main well, not the main one, but the different options I would go for. Option number 1 is that they do have digital platforms like Wise or Interactive Brokers. Wise, you can open up a bank account. It's an international banking platform. You can open up a bank account there. They will give you a virtual account number and routing number to be able to get the refunds and the like.
That's
That can
WISE,
work.
WISE, correct?
Yeah, WISE.
Okay.
That's one of them. You can absolutely use that platform and get it. There's some nuances and difficulties that come with it. So while that can definitely work, especially if you're looking for something that's like $100 or the like, open up a Wise account and you can have it be in US dollars, transfer it to
Great.
shekels
Yeah.
afterwards. The problem with those platforms are generally that they themselves are not a real physical bank. And they often jump to like sister banks or some other physical bank that exists
Uh,
in the US. And so what was your account 1 year might not be your account in the next year, your virtual account number. And so you have to be very, very on top of it and make sure that you get the right virtual account number each year. And your tax return as you're filing might just take the old number that was there last year. And if you're not paying attention, might just file with that, which no longer works. So you have to
Got
be
it.
very careful in terms of what account numbers you're using. If you use such a platform like that, interactive brokers also can work, but they want you to invest through them. They don't want it to just be or a checking account that you get the money and then transfer it. So
Mhm.
you'd have to look at it and say, okay, I want to invest through Interactive Brokers. Then you could potentially use it as a way of getting your money from the IRS if there is a refund, but don't use it as just that pure checking flow through. But those ideas would potentially work for non US people, US people, and the like.
There is
Something
you had
that
mentioned something about a State Department, Federal Credit Union. Is that an option?
Yeah, so I would say that's kind of option 2, and I think that the benefit there is that you're dealing with real US banks.
Right, correct.
You are dealing with something that is, FDIC insured. You can, rest your hat on it. It is just for American citizens. There is a special group called American Citizens Abroad. And if you sign up through that website, you can then get access to the State Department Federal Credit Union and open up a bank account there using that. I will give a very warm shout out to Irene Wachsler, who is based out of New York, and she has been working wonders for American citizens
Well,
abroad and people with New York CPA groups in order to kind of get through to the IRS. They just did a wonderful discussion with people who worked at the IRS to kind of link the gap between
oh,
taxpayers and the IRS
that's very
themselves.
cool.
Really wonderful person. And so there's a lot of movement there, but that is absolutely a fantastic option for people. There is a process that you have to go through. You have to get registered and everything else. But then once you do that, you can have a real US bank account, even if you're living abroad, and use that
Okay, so that
debits,
that that
credits.
that should reassure people that are listening to this, who might already be in panic mode. Only thing is that, going through and reopening bank accounts or using this Wise platform do we have any downside here? Um, as you said, it's the default. You still will get a paper check, okay, if worse comes to worse.
Yeah. So there's other options of what you can do. If nothing really works, right? Then currently, at least, the IRS is still willing to go with paper checks. But that whole system is going to be a funny system.
Yeah, and these things do end abruptly, like the story I told about my late grandfather. One day they
Yeah.
just that's it, it's over. Um,
Yeah.
A few years ago, I ran a seminar in Estonia, and that is a country that is 100% digital. Okay. There is no forms, there are no checks, there everything, even you have a little USB, like a key on disk on key, or it's built into your computer even. And there were no excuses. Senior citizens had to be trained. You sign up when you're born. You know already what kindergarten your kid is going to be in. You know what hospital. You sign your leases. Everything is digital. So it's coming. Okay, the U.S. may be a little behind, but I think everyone listening to this podcast today should I think we're giving them sufficient lead time to get their act together, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, having said that, what should people be doing now?
Yeah, so I think that there is one more solution that people can
Ah,
use. I would
okay.
only do it if you're doing big numbers, big amounts, and that is there's companies like FiberPay, which are
Okay.
really more foreign exchange companies. But the way that they work for the most part is they will again give you a virtual account number to use, and you can kind of stick with that virtual account number. The main issue that comes up then with those types of accounts is really the fact that uh, it usually goes through some kind of like UK account. And as you know, US citizens living abroad, all of a sudden you open up a UK account that takes your money, sucks it into there, and then moves it to a US account, or it goes to US, UK, and then to your foreign account in your local country. So that can create another account that you need to report on FBAR or FACA
Uh,
purposes. And so, I
okay.
would definitely be careful with all of these things. But
All
let's
right, but
say
that's a small inconvenience.
yeah. So let's say you none of these options work for you, right? Let's say none of these things work for you, and you really, really need that check still. So the way that the IRS will work is that the IRS will currently say, okay, when we receive your tax return and we process it, we are going to send you a notice. That notice is going to say you have 30 days to respond and tell us why you don't want it digitally and why you want it in a paper check. If you can give us your bank account information, then great, we will process it that way. However, if you don't respond within that 30-day window, then they will still send you that paper check right now. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what does that practically mean for US people living in Israel? Right? If you think about that, or US people living anywhere internationally, right? I just received a letter in the mail from a Rosh Hashanah greeting card, right? That was that was sent in and I thought
Yeah.
like, oh, it was
You're
sent in January, and it was like, no, that was sent in October. I looked at the postage, right? So if you are receiving something now in February that was sent in October, like this letter from the IRS, you're never going to receive it in time. And then
yeah. Excellent point. Yeah.
let's say you magically did and you sent back the response to the IRS, right? When was the last time that the IRS opened up their mail within 30 days? That's not going to happen. So even if you FedEx it back and forth, there's no way that they're going to look at that within 30 days. And so there's almost no positive way that this will do anything or change anything. The only thing it's going to do possibly is just delay refunds. So if you are stuck with that paper check refund, just be ready that there will be a further delay. As I mean, many people are already aware of the IRS delays that exist, but even now, there will be a further delay that will go
And as
further and
as
further.
you know, there are many people that those refund checks are important, especially
Yeah.
if it's the child refundable checks credit. That's money that is people count on, and it's I know it's frustrating for people. And all right, so what's our takeaway here from all of this then?
So takeaway, action item. Let's say,
Action.
you want to check into those different banking options and the like, right? That's key number one. But let's say that even that isn't really an option, or you're not planning on filing your tax return in the near future. What should you do today? Today, I would say we have an excellent guide on our website, www.pstein.com, right? That goes through how to set up an ID.me account, right?
Mm,
And you can do that. It guides you through it. Even if you're living internationally and you don't have a US phone number, you can still sign up and get it. There are documents that you need. So read that manual, read that guide. I will say if you set up an ID.me account, it is so, so important. And if you do one thing, that would be what I would suggest to do these days, because it will give you access into seeing what the IRS has on file for you, what they're missing. And so it doesn't mean that you have to stay on hold for 2 hours to get to an IRS representative. You can see what the status is with your refunds and your checks and your payments and your tax returns and everything. So the one takeaway I would say, check out ID.me,
Okay,
but
great.
also make sure that you are filing. If you do have a US bank account, make sure go over your tax return, ask any tax preparer that sends you a tax return, say, I just want to make sure, are my bank details on here to get a refund? Because if it's not, it will be painful going forward.
All right, I'll conclude at least my end a story that it's one unforgettable. I had a colleague many years who was a senior person in Social Security Administration, one of the local offices in New York, and we're probably talking here back in the 80s, and they had a tradition that if someone hit 100 years old, which was pretty rare 30, 40 years ago, now we're hearing it more and more often, they would personally deliver the check, the famous Social Security check, to the
Really?
person's house. The senior people from that district office would come, knock on the door. They go to this house in, I think it was in Brooklyn. They knock on the door. An old lady answers the doors, and they say, "Is Mrs. Cohen here?" And she says, "No, she's out at the grocery store. She's shopping right now." "When will she back?" "I'm not sure." But they said, "Well, here's her check, and Mazel tov, congratulations on her being 100." So a month passed. They said still wanted to do the tech. They wanted to do the ceremony and get the photo op. And they go again, and the same old lady answers the door, and the same answer. She's at the supermarket. They said, "Wait a second, what's going on here?" Well, it turned out the woman had died many years ago. This was her daughter, and that is actually what they used to do. Daughter would take the Social Security check, the mother would endorse it, go to the local supermarket. That's where people used to cash checks other than the bank. And this went on for many years. The fact that she died, no one asked any questions. So I think those days are long gone, and probably a
I don't
few
know if
years.
they're long gone based off of the reports that we saw last year in terms of,
That's
there was
true.
people 200 years old receiving Social Security
That's
checks and the
true.
like.
That is true. That is true. But I think it's probably, you know, with all that's going on, I think Trump is right. It'll be much easier. It probably will save the federal government a lot of money.
Yeah.
Um,
If the IRS can figure out ways to work with international banks, I think there will be a lot of happy customers.
right.
It'll
All
be
right,
a big
Jakob.
step.
So this is very helpful. And as you say, our website, particularly with the ID Me, and again, some of those resources that you mentioned, I don't know if that's something we have up there.
There's tons
Um,
on our blogs galore. We have
okay,
updates on all types of investment advice and Aliyah advice and everything. So yeah,
correct.
absolutely.
Terrific. Okay, so
Fantastic.
I'm off.
Thank you, Philip.